I ran away from my wedding and fell into the hands of a mafia boss. Vincent Moretti looked at me as if he'd just caught a lost prey wandering into the devil's territory. Then his cold hand brushed over the necklace around my neck, and my world collapsed. "This belonged to my mother," he said quietly, his eyes darkening. "The woman who was killed in the massacre 20 years ago." I didn't have time to understand, only saw a shadow looming, the iron door slamming shut. I thought I had escaped one prison, but it turned out I had only traded it for another, one ruled by the most dangerous man in Italy. 3 weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant, and the thing that froze me to the core, the child inside me, belonged to Vincent Moretti. The rain was coming down hard that day, soaking through my wedding dress, turning the white lace into a heavy, muddy mess that clung to my skin. I remember standing at the altar, Ethan's hand gripping my wrist too tight, his breath hot against my ear as he whispered, "After today, you won't have freedom, not even in your sleep." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through me like a knife, sharp and cold. The church was packed, his family, his business partners, all those polished people in their tailored suits and glittering jewelry, staring at me like I was some prize Ethan had won. I was just Clara Hayes, the girl from the wrong side of town, the one who grew up in a trailer with a mom who worked double shifts at the diner. They looked at me like I didn't belong, and maybe I didn't. But when Ethan said those words, something in me snapped. I couldn't breathe. The organ was playing, the priest was droning on, and all I could think was, I'm not going to be his cage. I turned and ran, right down the aisle, past the shocked faces, out into the storm. My shoes sank into the mud and I didn't look back. Not once. Hey, before I go on, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing these stories with you. Stories about heartbreak, betrayal, and finding your way through. Just a quick tap, and we'll keep going together. The next morning, I woke up to my face plastered across every newsstand. "Crazy bride runs from millionaire groom," the headlines screamed. Ethan's family wasted no time. They leaked stories to the press, saying I was unhinged, mentally unstable, a gold digger who'd lost her mind when she got a taste of the good life. I saw one article that quoted an anonymous source, claiming I'd been institutionalized as a teenager. A lie, but it stuck. My phone buzzed with texts from people I hadn't talked to in years. Old classmates, distant cousins, all asking what was wrong with me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was holed up in a cheap hotel room, the kind with stained carpets and a flickering neon sign outside the window. I'd used the last of my cash to pay for one night, and when the manager saw my face on the morning news, he told me to get out. "We don't want trouble here," he said, not even looking at me. So there I was, standing on the street in a torn wedding dress, no wallet, no plan, just the necklace my mom gave me when I was 16, the one thing I had left. I found a diner a few blocks away, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since dawn. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Doris, slid a plate of toast in front of me without asking, her hand brushing mine like she knew I was running on empty. I tried to tell her I couldn't pay, but she just waved me off, muttering, "Eat, kid. You look like you've been through hell." I took a bite, the bread dry in my mouth, when a man in a suit walked in, his shoes too shiny for a place like this. He sat across from me, his smile sharp, and dropped a newspaper on the table. "Clara Hayes," he said like he was reading a verdict. "Ethan's not done with you." I froze, my fingers crumbling the toast. He leaned closer, his voice low. "He's got people looking. You think you can run from him?" I pushed the plate away, my hands shaking, and stood up. "Tell him I'm already gone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and walked out, the bell above the door jingling behind me. I wandered into an old bar, the kind of place that smelled like stale beer and regret. And that's when I saw him. Vincent Moretti. He was sitting in the corner, alone, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. The bar was dim, but he stood out. Sharp suit, dark eyes, the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller. I didn't know who he was then, just that he was watching me, his gaze steady, like he could see right through the mud on my dress and the shame on my face. I sat at the bar, ordered a water I couldn't pay for, and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking. He slid into the stool next to me, his voice low, almost soft, but it carried weight. "Who are you running from?" he asked. I froze, my fingers tightening around the glass. I didn't answer, just looked at him, and that's when he reached out, his hand brushing the necklace at my throat. His touch was cold, but it sent a jolt through me, like I'd been caught doing something wrong. "This belonged to my mother," he said, his voice quieter now, but harder, like steel. "The woman who was killed in the massacre 20 years ago." I didn't know what he meant, but the way his eyes darkened told me I was in trouble. Deep trouble. Before I could say anything, 2 men in black suits appeared behind me, their hands on my arms, pulling me toward the back of the bar. My heart was pounding, my dress catching on the rough floor, as they dragged me through a side door into a room that smelled like cigarette smoke and metal. Vincent followed, his steps slow, deliberate. "Tell me how you got this," he said, pointing to the necklace. I tried to explain. My mom gave it to me, said she found it at a pawn shop years ago, but his face didn't change. He didn't believe me. "You're either a liar or a spy," he said, and I saw the gun in his hand, not pointed at me, but close enough to make my stomach drop. I told him everything, about Ethan, the wedding, running away, but every word seemed to make him more suspicious. Then we heard it. Tires screeching outside, shouts, the crack of gunfire. Vincent's eyes flicked to the door, and in that split second I saw fear in him, just a flicker, before he grabbed my arm and pulled me behind him. "Stay down," he growled, as bullets tore through the wall. The gunfire stopped, but the air was thick with dust and the smell of blood. Vincent's men were dragging bodies across the floor, their boots leaving streaks on the concrete. I was crouched behind a crate, my knees pressed against my chest, trying to make myself small. One of Vincent's men, a guy with a scar across his cheek, knelt beside me, his breath heavy. "You're bad luck, you know that?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. He tossed me a rag to wipe the mud off my face, but it felt like he was throwing me a judgment. I took it, my hands trembling, and wiped my cheeks, the cloth coming away brown and red. Vincent stood over me, his eyes scanning the room, then back to me. "Those were Ethan's men," he said, his voice low, like he was piecing something together. "They're hunting you." I wanted to ask how he knew Ethan, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I clutched the rag, my knuckles white, and nodded. He turned away, barking orders to his men, and I realized I wasn't just a runaway anymore. I was caught in something much bigger. When the shooting stopped, Vincent took me to a safe house, a cold, empty apartment with barred windows and a single mattress on the floor. The walls were bare, the air stale, and her every sound made me jump. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with questions about Vincent, about Ethan, about the necklace that had turned my life upside down. I was sitting on the mattress, my knees pulled up, when Vincent came in, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes tired but sharp. He didn't sit, just stood there, looking at me. "You don't belong here," he said, not cruelly, but like it was a fact. I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't belong anywhere anymore, but I just stared at the floor, my fingers tracing the edge of the necklace. Then, something shifted. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he saw more than a runaway. We didn't talk after that. What happened wasn't soft or sweet. It was like a storm breaking, raw and urgent, and when it was over, I was left with his jacket over my shoulders and a sinking feeling that I'd just stepped deeper into his world. The next morning, I found a note on the table, written in sharp, slanted handwriting. "Stay put, you're not safe." I crumpled it in my fist, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and fear. I didn't want to be his prisoner, but the streets outside felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. I paced the safe house, the floor creaking under my steps, until one of Vincent's men showed up. A wiry guy named Marco, with a smirk that made my skin crawl. He leaned against the doorframe, tossing an apple between his hands. "So, you're the boss's new toy," he said, his eyes raking over me. I straightened, my jaw tight, and said, "I'm nobody's toy." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound, and took a bite of the apple. "Keep telling yourself that," he said, spitting a piece of skin onto the floor. "You're just a problem he doesn't know how to solve yet." I turned away, my hands clenched, and stared out the barred window, the city blurring through my tears. I wasn't going to let them break me, but every word felt like a stone piling up on my chest. 3 weeks later, I was staring at a pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. 2 pink lines. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the stick on the floor. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I hadn't seen Vincent since that night, and I wasn't even sure the baby was his. But Ethan? He'd found me again. Not in person, but through the news. Stories started popping up, calling my unborn child illegitimate, saying I was a nobody trying to trap a rich man. I'd walk into a coffee shop, and people would whisper, pointing at my face on the tabloids. I kept my head down, my hand resting on my stomach, trying to block it all out. Then Vincent's men found me again. They brought me to him, to a warehouse that smelled like oil and rust, and he was waiting, sitting in a chair like it was a throne. "Is it mine?" he asked, his voice flat, like he was asking about the weather. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, tears burning my eyes. He ordered a DNA test, and when the results came back, his face didn't change. "It's mine," he said, and his men started whispering behind him, their words sharp. "The boss got played." I stood in that warehouse, my shoes scuffing the grimy floor, as one of Vincent's men, a stocky guy with a gold chain, leaned in close, his breath sour. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice low, mocking. "Getting knocked up to tie yourself to the boss." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't look away. I set my jaw, my hand brushing my stomach, and said, "I didn't ask for this." He snorted, stepping back, and spat on the floor near my feet. The others laughed, a low rumble that made my skin prickle. I wanted to run, to disappear, but I stood there, my chin up, staring him down until he looked away. Vincent watched the whole thing, his eyes unreadable, but he didn't say a word. Later, alone in the safe house, I pressed my hands to my face, the tears hot against my palms, and promised myself I'd find a way out, for me, and for the life growing inside me. I tried to leave. I begged Vincent to let me go, to let me disappear. "You don't go anywhere until I decide what to do with you," he said, his voice low, final. I felt like a prisoner again, trapped in his world, a world I didn't understand. But I started to notice things. The way his men looked at me, the way they whispered when I walked by. They thought I was using him, that I'd planned this to get something from him. I wanted to scream that I didn't want his money, his power, any of it. I just wanted to be free. But then something shifted. One night I was in the safe house, trying to sleep, when I heard a commotion outside. Gunshots, screams, the sound of glass shattering. I ran to the window and saw Lucia, Vincent's right-hand woman, pinned down by 2 men with guns. I didn't think, I just grabbed a knife from the kitchen and ran outside, my heart pounding. I stabbed one of the men in the arm and he dropped his gun, cursing. Lucia took the other one down, her movements quick, precise. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and said, "You're crazier than I thought." The air was thick with smoke when Lucia pulled me behind a dumpster, her grip tight on my wrist. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed, her voice sharp but her eyes softer, like she was torn between gratitude and worry. I was still clutching the knife, my hand slick with sweat, when one of the attackers staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his arm. He pointed at me, his face twisted with rage. "You're dead, you hear me? You and that bastard kid." I froze, the knife slipping in my hand, but Lucia stepped in front of me, her gun raised. "Touch her, and you're done," she said, her voice steady as stone. The man backed off, disappearing into the shadows, but his words stayed with me, clawing at my chest. I looked at Lucia, my breath shaky, and she gave me a small nod, like we'd just made a pact. That night, I didn't sleep. the knife still in my hand, the weight of her loyalty heavier than I expected. Lucia started to trust me after that. She'd bring me coffee, sit with me in the safe house, tell me stories about Vincent, how he'd built his empire from nothing, how he never let anyone close. "He's not what you think," she said one day, her voice soft. "He's broken, just like the rest of us." I didn't know what to make of that, but I held on to it, like it was a piece of him I could understand. Then came the day of my first ultrasound. I was alone in the clinic, lying on the table, the technician's wand cold against my skin. I heard the heartbeat fast and steady, and I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't expect Vincent to show up, but there he was, standing in the doorway, his suit wrinkled, his face unreadable. He walked over, took my hand, and I felt his fingers tremble against mine. "That's our kid," he said, so quiet I almost didn't hear him. For the first time, I saw something in him, something human, something scared. I wanted to believe it meant something, but I didn't know if I could trust it. A few days later, I was walking through the market, trying to blend in, when a woman bumped into me, her purse spilling onto the ground. I bent to help her, picking up her keys, when she grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "You're that girl," she said, her voice loud enough for others to turn and stare. "The one who trapped Moretti with a kid." I pulled my hand back, my face burning, but she kept going, her words sharp as knives. "You think you're special? You're nothing but a cheap trick." People around us started whispering, their phones out, snapping pictures. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I adjusted my scarf covering the necklace and said, "You don't know me." My voice was quiet, but it carried, and she faltered, stepping back. I walked away, my heart pounding, the crowd's eyes like weights on my back, but I kept my head high, refusing to let them see me break. Then the rumors started again. The papers said Vincent had bought the runaway bride, that I was just a tool to give him an heir. They called me the Mafia's whore, and the words burned every time I saw them. I'd walk through the safe house, and Vincent's men would look away like I was something dirty. Ethan showed up one day, out of nowhere, standing outside the warehouse with flowers in his hand, his face all fake regret. "I made a mistake, Clara," he said, his voice smooth, like he hadn't ruined my life. "Come back to me." I wanted to spit in his face, but something in his eyes made me pause. He was too calm, too confident. Against my better judgment, I went with him, just to talk, I told myself. But it was a trap. The second I stepped into his car, the doors locked, and I was driven to a warehouse, hands tied, Ethan's men laughing as they shoved me inside. "You thought you could run?" one of them said, his breath hot against my face. And then I heard her voice, Lucia's. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said, her eyes red, her hands shaking. She'd betrayed me. She'd told them where to find me. I was on my knees in that warehouse, the ropes cutting into my wrists, when Ethan walked in, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete. He crouched in front of me, his smile cold, and held up a photo of me from the wedding, my dress pristine, my face hopeful. "Look at you then," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "And now, you're nothing." He tore the photo in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. I stared at them, my chest tight, and felt something shift inside me, not fear, but anger, hot and steady. I lifted my head, meeting his gaze, and said, "You're wrong, I'm more than you'll ever understand." His smile faltered just for a second before he stood, brushing his hands like he was done with me. But that moment, that flicker of doubt in his eyes, stayed with me, fueling something I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let him win, not again. Vincent came for me, bursting through the doors with his men, guns blazing. I was on the floor, my wrists burning from the ropes, my heart breaking as he looked at me. "I knew you were never innocent," he said, his voice like ice. I wanted to scream, to tell him it wasn't true, but the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, staring at the blood on the floor, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. Later, I found out the truth. Lucia hadn't betrayed me willingly. Gabriel Rossi, Vincent's rival, had kidnapped her family, forced her to give me up. When I heard that, something in me broke. I couldn't hate her, not after everything. So when I got the chance, I ran to where they were holding her, a rundown building on the edge of town. I cut her ropes, helped her stand, and we faced Gabriel's men together, cornered, outnumbered. I thought we were done for. But Vincent came again, crashing through the door, his gun steady as he shot Gabriel down. He knelt in front of me, his hands bloody, his voice raw. "I was wrong," he said, "and I'll pay for it. Even with my life." Lucia died that night, her breath shallow as she grabbed my hand. "She's not your pawn," she whispered to Vincent. "She's what keeps you alive." The night Lucia died, I sat in the safe house, her blood still on my hands, the silence heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Vincent was across the room, his head bowed, cleaning his gun like it was the only thing keeping him together. I wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between us, but my throat was raw. One of his men walked in, a tall guy with a limp, and tossed a stack of papers on the table, legal documents, all with my name on them. "You're famous now," he said, his voice sharp with sarcasm. "The whole city thinks you're playing Vincent for a fool." I picked up the papers, my hands shaking, and saw headlines accusing me of orchestrating everything, from the wedding to the pregnancy. I dropped them, my fingers numb, and looked at Vincent. He didn't meet my eyes, just kept cleaning his gun, the clicks loud in the quiet room. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and walked out, the weight of their doubts pressing down on me, but my resolve growing sharper with every step. After that, things changed between me and Vincent. He promised to protect me and the baby, but he said he'd never marry me. "I don't do that," he said, his voice flat, like it was a rule he'd never break. I didn't argue. I didn't want his name. I just wanted my child to be safe. But his world didn't make it easy. His men mocked us, saying an illegitimate child would ruin his empire. I heard them whispering, saw the way they looked at me, like I was a mistake he'd made. Then Vincent got hurt, badly. A rival gang ambushed him, left him bleeding out in an alley. I found him, dragged him to the safe house, and stayed by his side while he fought to stay alive. His men didn't know what to do without him, so I stepped in. I used everything I'd learned, every conversation I'd overheard, every strategy Vincent had let slip. I gave orders, moved money, made deals. The men hated it. "You're just the boss's shadow," one of them spat, his face twisted with disgust. I stood my ground, even when they tied me up, even when one of them hit me, my blood dripping onto the floor as I shielded my belly. In the chaos of those days, I found a ledger in Vincent's office, hidden in a locked drawer I pried open with a letter opener. It was filled with names, dates, deals, proof that Ethan had been working with Gabriel Rossi to undermine Vincent's empire. I didn't hesitate. I took it to Vincent's top lieutenant, a grizzled man named Carlo who barely spoke to me. I slammed the ledger on the table, my finger pointing to Ethan's name. "He's been playing you all," I said, my voice steady despite the bruise blooming on my cheek. Carlo's eyes narrowed, but he read the pages, his jaw tightening with every line. By morning, he'd rallied the men and they moved on Ethan's contacts, shutting down his operations one by one. I stood in the background, my arms crossed, watching them scramble to follow my lead. One of the younger guys, barely older than me, caught my eye and nodded, a small gesture that felt like a crack in their wall of doubt. I didn't smile back, but I felt it. A shift, like the ground was starting to steady beneath me. I didn't break. I couldn't. I remembered something Vincent had told me once, about how to outsmart an enemy. Let them think they've won, then turn their own game against them. So I did. I played their egos, fed them false information, let them think I was weak. When they let their guard down, I made my move. I called in favors Vincent had taught me about, used contacts he'd trusted, and one by one I outmaneuvered them. By the time Vincent woke up, the entire organization was answering to me. I walked into the meeting room, my dress stained with sweat and blood, and faced his men. They didn't laugh anymore. They knelt. Vincent was there, leaning against the wall, his face pale but his eyes sharp. He looked at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've stolen my empire," he said, his voice soft, almost proud. I met his gaze, my hand resting on my swollen belly. "No," I said. I'm keeping it safe, for the one who'll rule beside me. When I was 8 months pregnant, I went to a safe house to meet a supplier, someone Vincent trusted. The room was crowded, the air thick with cigar smoke, and the men barely acknowledged me, their voices loud, dismissive. One of them, a guy with a scar over his eye, stood up, his chair scraping the floor, and pointed at me. "Why is she here?" he demanded, his voice carrying over the others. "She's not one of us." I felt every eye in the room turn to me, their stares heavy, judging. I adjusted my scarf, my fingers brushing the necklace, and stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "I'm here because I know what you don't," I said, holding up a burner phone with a recorded conversation, proof the supplier was skimming profits. The room went quiet, the man's face reddening as I played the audio, his own voice betraying him. I didn't look away, didn't flinch, even as my heart raced. They didn't challenge me again that day, and when I left, I heard one of them mutter, "She's more than she looks." But it wasn't over. Just before I was due to give birth, Gabriel Rossi came back. I didn't know how he'd survived, but there he was, his face scarred, his eyes burning with hate. He kidnapped me, dragged me to an oil warehouse that reeked of gasoline and rust. "I'll let you deliver it," he snarled, his gun pressed against my temple. "Then I'll kill you both." I was in labor, the pain ripping through me, my screams echoing off the metal walls. I gave birth on the cold floor, my blood and tears mixing with the dirt. My daughter's first cry, the only thing keeping me conscious. Gabriel forced me to call Vincent, made me hold the phone so he could hear her cry. "Hear your child," he said, laughing, "for the last time." I thought we were done for, but then I heard it. The explosion. The warehouse shook, flames roaring up the walls. Vincent had blown the whole place to hell to get to us. In the fire, I clutched my daughter, her tiny body trembling against mine as I stumbled through the smoke. Gabriel's men were shouting, their voices lost in the roar of the flames. I saw Vincent ahead, his silhouette blurred by the heat, his shirt torn and bloody. He reached for us, but a beam fell, cutting him off, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost him. I screamed his name, my voice hoarse, and pushed forward, my arms burning from the heat, but never letting go of her. One of Gabriel's men lunged at me, his knife gleaming, but I swung a piece of broken pipe, catching him across the jaw. He fell, and I kept moving, my eyes locked on Vincent. When I reached him, he was on his knees, his breath ragged, but he pulled us close, his hand cupping our daughter's head. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice breaking, and I felt his tears against my skin, mixing with the ash. I held my daughter tight, her tiny body warm against mine, as I stumbled through the fire. Vincent was there, collapsing in front of me, blood soaking through his shirt. He reached out, his hand shaking, and touched her forehead. "If this is the price to keep you and our child," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I'll pay it." I didn't think. I grabbed his gun, turned, and shot Gabriel. I watched him stagger, his body falling into the flames, his screams swallowed by the fire. I don't know how we got out. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was something else. But we survived. Vincent, me, and our daughter. He kissed her forehead later, in the hospital, his hand steady now. "From now on," he said, "she's ours. I'm not the girl who ran from her wedding anymore. I'm not the runaway bride, or the crazy one, or the mafia's whore. I'm Clara Hayes, the woman who walked through fire and came out stronger. I've been underestimated my whole life, by Ethan, by Vincent's men, by everyone who thought I was nothing. But I never was. You've felt that too, haven't you? That moment when the world tries to make you small, but you know you're not. You carry your heart like a shield and you keep going. That's what I did. That's what we all do. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.